The sun hung low over the Wyoming Territory, painting the vast expanse of prairie grass in shades of burnished gold. Red dust swirled in the hot wind, carrying with it the scent of sage and the distant lowing of cattle. The herd moved slowly toward the corrals, their hooves raising small clouds that caught the dying light like copper pennies tossed into the air. Eleanor Whitfield stood on the wide porch of her father's ranch house, one hand resting on a weathered column as she watched the cowboys bring in the cattle. At 22, she possessed the kind of beauty that seemed almost out of place in this harsh landscape porcelain skin that she fought to keep from freckling despite hours in the sun. Auburn hair that she wore pinned up in the fashion of Eastern ladies, and green eyes that held a restlessness her father pretended not to notice. She was alone, as she often was. The daughter of Thomas Whitfield, one of the wealthiest ranchers in the territory. Eleanor lived in a world of invisible walls. The other ranchers' daughters found her too refined, while she found them too coarse. The few eligible bachelors who called upon her spoke only of cattle prices and land acquisitions, never of the books she read or the dreams that haunted her nights. Her gaze drifted to the horizon, where the mountains rose like dark sentinels against the painted sky. Somewhere beyond those peaks lay California, San Francisco, places where a woman might breathe freely, might speak her mind without causing scandal. But here, on the Double W Ranch, she was merely an ornament, a prize to be eventually won by whichever man her father deemed worthy. Among the riders bringing in the herd, one figure moved with a grace that distinguished him from the others. Luke Carson sat his horse as if born to the saddle, his movements economical and sure. He'd been working at the Double W for 3 months now, and in that time, Eleanor had noticed him more than she cared to admit. He was perhaps 25, with sun-darkened skin and sandy hair that fell past his collar. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds, and they held the weathered look of a man who'd seen too much too young. The other hand said he'd come up from Texas, that he'd been orphaned young and raised himself on the trail. He spoke little, worked hard, and kept to himself, qualities that Thomas Whitfield valued in his employees. Eleanor watched as Luke separated a stray calf from the herd, guiding it back with a gentle precision. There was something in the way he handled the animals, firm but kind, that spoke of a deeper nature than the rough cowboys who spent their wages on whiskey and women in town. Their first real encounter had come 2 weeks prior, by the fence line that separated the house grounds from the working ranch. Eleanor had been walking, seeking escape from her father's latest lecture about appropriate behavior for a lady of her station, when she'd found Luke mending a broken rail. He'd looked up at her approach, those gray eyes meeting hers for a long moment before he touched the brim of his hat. "Miss Whitfield. Mr. Carson." She'd stopped a proper distance away, aware of the impropriety of speaking to him alone, yet unable to simply walk past. "The fence giving you trouble? Storm last week weakened this section. One of the bulls took advantage." His voice was low, roughened by dust and distance, but there was an unexpected gentleness in it. "My father says we're due for more storms. The clouds have been building over the mountains." Luke had glanced toward the peaks, then back at her. "You watch the weather, miss?" "I watch everything," she'd replied, surprising herself with the honesty. "There's little else to do here but watch and wait." Something had shifted in his expression then, a recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit trapped by circumstance. "I knew a Mustang once," he'd said slowly. "Beautiful creature, smart as anything. Some men caught her, tried to break her for riding. She'd stand at the corral fence for hours, just staring at the horizon. What happened to her? One night, she jumped the fence. Near broke her leg doing it, but she made it back to her herd." He'd paused, hands stilling on the fence rail. "Some creatures aren't meant for cages, no matter how pretty they're made." The conversation had haunted Eleanor since, replaying in quiet moments when she sat at her embroidery or pretended to listen to her father's business associates at dinner. Now, as the last of the cattle were secured for the night, Eleanor saw her father emerge from the barn. Thomas Whitfield was a large man, built like the bulls he raised. with iron-gray hair and eyes that could freeze a man at 20 paces. He spotted Luke dismounting near the water trough and strode over with purpose. Eleanor couldn't hear the words, but she could read the tension in her father's posture, the way Luke's shoulders stiffened. Her father gestured sharply toward the house, toward her, and Luke's gaze followed the movement. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the distance, and Eleanor felt her breath catch. Her father's voice rose just enough for her to catch the end. "Stay away from her, Carson, or you'll be looking for work elsewhere." That clear. "Clear, Mr. Whitfield." Eleanor stepped back into the shadows of the porch, her cheeks burning with humiliation and anger. Her father had noticed, then noticed the way she looked for Luke among the hands. Noticed perhaps how she found reasons to walk near the corrals when he was working. She retreated to her room, standing at the window that overlooked the bunkhouse and beyond it, the endless prairie. The conflict that had simmered in her chest for months now boiled over. She was trapped between duty and desire, between the life planned for her and the life she imagined when she allowed herself to dream. Her father expected her to marry well, to secure alliances that would expand the Double W's holdings. He'd been bringing potential suitors around for the past year, bankers' sons, other ranchers' heirs, even a railroad executive from Denver. All of them looked at her like she was another asset to be acquired, another head of cattle to add to their count. But when Luke Carson looked at her, she felt seen, not as Thomas Whitfield's daughter, not as a prize to be won, but as Eleanor, a woman with her own thoughts, her own desires, her own fierce need for something more than this gilded cage. The moon rose pale and hazy over the grassland, casting long shadows across the yard. Eleanor knew she should prepare for bed, should put away these dangerous thoughts and accept her lot. But instead, she found herself pulling a shawl around her shoulders and slipping out the back door. The night air was cool against her skin, scented with the earthy richness of cattle and grass. She walked without conscious destination, her feet carrying her toward the small grove of cottonwoods that grew near the stream. It was there, in that pocket of shadow and whispering leaves, that she saw him. Luke stood with his back against a tree, smoking a hand-rolled cigarette. He straightened when he saw her, dropping the cigarette and crushing it beneath his boot. "Miss Whitfield, you shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be many places. Mr. Carson, yet here I am." She stopped just outside the grove's shadow, maintaining the pretense of propriety even as her heart raced. "My father warned you away." "He did. Yet you're here. So are you." They stood in silence, the space between them charged with unspoken words. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever feel like you're suffocating? Like the world is pressing in from all sides until you can barely breathe?" Luke took a step closer, still maintaining distance, but close enough now that she could see the pain in his eyes. "Every day, miss, but for different reasons than yours, I reckon." "Tell me." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I've been alone since I was 8. Parents died of fever. No kin to take me in. Learned to cowboy because it was that or starve. Been drifting ever since. No place to call home. No one to call family." He looked at her then. Really looked at her. "You're trapped by having too much. I'm trapped by having nothing." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Without thinking, she closed the distance between them, drawn by a force stronger than propriety. "We're both trapped, then both longing for something we can't have. Eleanor." Her name on his lips was a warning and a plea. She stopped just short of touching him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, to smell the leather and smoke and honest sweat of him. "Sometimes I think I'd trade everything, the house, the money, all of it, just to be free, to ride away and never look back." "You don't know what you're saying. The world's hard for a woman alone. And it's easy here, watching my life be bartered away to the highest bidder, sitting silent while men decide my future as if I were no more than breeding stock." The bitterness in her voice seemed to break something in him. Luke reached out, his calloused fingers barely grazing her cheek. You deserve better than what this place offers. So do you." The night wind stirred the cottonwood leaves above them, and for a moment, the rest of the world ceased to exist. There was only the two of them, standing at the edge of something dangerous and irreversible. "We should go back," Luke said, though he made no move to leave. "Should we?" Their eyes met and held. Gray storms meeting green fire. The air between them hummed with possibility and peril. Everything they'd been taught, everything society demanded, said this was wrong. But in that moment, beneath the hazy moon and whispered leaves, nothing had ever felt more right. The morning sun rose harsh and unforgiving over the Double W Ranch, as if determined to burn away the secrets of the night. Eleanor woke with her heart still racing. The memory of that forbidden embrace seared into her very soul. She dressed mechanically, her fingers trembling as she fastened the buttons of her day dress. At breakfast, her father's eyes were sharp as flint. "You were out late last night." "Eleanor, I couldn't sleep. The moon was beautiful." The lie came easily, though it tasted bitter on her tongue. "See that your restlessness doesn't lead you anywhere inappropriate." His tone left no room for argument. By the time Eleanor ventured onto the porch with her needlework, the ranch was already alive with activity. She tried to focus on her embroidery, but her eyes kept drifting to the corrals, searching. When she finally spotted Luke working with the horses, their eyes met for just an instant before he turned away. The whispers started at midday. Mrs. Henderson, the cook, was talking in hushed tones with James, the senior ranch hand. They fell silent when Eleanor passed, but she caught fragments. "Saw them by the cottonwoods, asking for trouble. Mr. Whitfield won't stand for it." By evening, the entire ranch seemed to crackle with tension. Eleanor watched from her window as her father strode toward the bunkhouse, his face dark as a thundercloud, her stomach twisted with dread. She couldn't hear the confrontation, but she saw its aftermath. Luke emerged from the bunkhouse carrying his few possessions rolled in a blanket. His jaw was set, his movements careful, as if he were holding himself under tight control. Behind him, her father stood in the doorway, hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "No!" The word escaped Eleanor's lips as she flew down the stairs and out the door. "Eleanor, get back in the house!" Her father's voice boomed across the yard, but she was already running, her skirts gathered in her fists, not caring who saw or what they thought. She reached Luke just as he was tying his bedroll to his saddle. "You can't leave," she said breathlessly. "Got no choice. Miss Whitfield?" He wouldn't look at her, focusing instead on securing his meager belongings. "Your father made things clear. I'm gone by sunrise, or he'll see me gone permanent." "This is my fault. I should never have—" "Don't." He turned to her then, and she saw the anguish in his gray eyes. "Don't apologize for being the first real thing I've felt in years." "Eleanor—" Her father was striding toward them now, his face purple with rage. "Get away from him this instant! Father, please!" "Not another word. You've shamed yourself and this family enough." He grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. "As for you, Carson, you've got 1 hour to clear off my land. Show your face here again and I'll put a bullet in it." Luke's hand moved instinctively toward his own gun, then stilled. "I'm leaving, Mr. Whitfield, but not because of your threats, because she deserves better than what would come from me staying." He swung up into the saddle with fluid grace, then looked down at Eleanor one last time. "Maybe someday," he said quietly. Words meant only for her, when things are different. Then he was gone, spurring his horse toward the horizon, dust rising in his wake like smoke from an extinguished fire. Eleanor stood frozen, watching until he was no more than a speck against the vast expanse of prairie. Her father's hand was still on her arm, but she felt nothing except the hollow ache in her chest. "Get inside," Thomas Whitfield said coldly. "We'll discuss your behavior when I've calmed down enough not to do something we'll both regret." The days that followed blurred together in a haze of misery. Eleanor was confined to the house, allowed out only for supervised walks in the garden, The servants avoided her eyes, and the ranch hands turned away when she passed. She had become a scandal. A cautionary tale whispered about in the bunkhouse and the kitchen. Her father brought in Mrs. Prudence Cole, a severe woman from Denver who specialized in refining wayward young ladies. Eleanor endured lessons in deportment, lectures on propriety, and endless hours of supervised activity designed to drive any improper thoughts from her mind. But at night, when Mrs. Cole was asleep and the house was quiet, Eleanor would stand at her window and stare out at the cottonwood grove. She could still feel the warmth of Luke's embrace, still hear the raw honesty in his voice when he spoke of loneliness and longing. Word came through the ranch hands' gossip that Luke had found work at a spread near the Colorado border. Then, a month later, that he'd moved on again, heading north toward Montana. Each piece of news was a knife in Eleanor's heart, but also a strange comfort. He was out there, somewhere, under the same vast sky. The worst came when Samuel Morrison arrived from Cheyenne, a widower twice Eleanor's age. He owned several successful freight companies and was looking for a young wife to grace his mansion and bear his children. Her father invited him to stay at the ranch, and Eleanor understood with crystal clarity that her time of mourning was over. Morrison was everything Luke was not, soft where Luke was hard, calculating where Luke was honest, cold where Luke was warm. He looked at Eleanor with the appraising eye of a man buying horseflesh, and spoke to her father about dowries and business partnerships while she sat silent as a porcelain doll. "He's a good match," her father told her after Morrison's third visit. "He'll provide well for you, give you a position in society. You'll thank me one day." Eleanor wanted to scream that she'd rather die than share a bed with that calculating stranger, but she'd learned the futility of rebellion. Instead, she nodded and excused herself, claiming a headache. In her room, she pulled out the one tangible reminder of those forbidden moments, a small piece of cloth torn from her shawl when it caught on the cottonwood bark that night. She held it to her face, imagining she could still smell the leather and smoke scent of him, somewhere out there. Luke Carson was riding beneath the stars, perhaps thinking of her as she thought of him. She had to believe that. Had to believe that their story wasn't over, that someday wasn't just an empty promise meant to soften the blow of goodbye, because if she didn't have that hope, the walls of her father's house would crush her entirely. The prairie wind howled outside her window, and Eleanor closed her eyes, letting it carry her dreams across the miles to wherever a gray-eyed cowboy might be making camp. In her mind, she was there with him, free beneath the endless sky, bound by nothing but the choice to stay. But when morning came, she would wake in her prison of propriety, one day closer to a marriage that would seal her fate forever. Unless someday came sooner than expected. Unless promises made beneath cottonwood trees and prairie moons were stronger than the chains of convention. Eleanor pressed the torn cloth to her heart and made her own promise to the wind. She would endure. She would survive. And she would be ready when Luke Carson came riding back into her life. Because men like her father thought they controlled the world with their money and their guns. But they'd never understood the power of a love that refused to die, or the strength of a woman who'd tasted freedom, however briefly, and would never forget its flavor. The red dust of evening settled over the ranch, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled its loneliness to the darkening sky. 3 years had passed since that night beneath the cottonwoods, and the Double W Ranch bore the scars of time and misfortune. The drought had come first. 2 summers of merciless sun that baked the prairie grass to brittle straw and dried the streams to trickles. Then came the winter die-off, when a late blizzard caught the herd in the open. Eleanor had watched from her window as the hands dragged frozen carcasses to the bone pile. Each dead steer another debt added to the ledger. Her father had aged a decade in those 3 years. Thomas Whitfield, once robust as his prize bulls, now moved with the careful gait of an old man. The coughing had started last spring, deep, wet sounds that he tried to muffle with his handkerchief. Dr. Morrison from town, no relation to Samuel, thankfully, had prescribed rest and clean air. But Thomas Whitfield knew only one way to live, working until he dropped. Eleanor had changed too. At 25, the softness of youth had given way to something harder, more resilient. She'd learned to keep the ranch books when her father's eyes grew too weak for the columns of figures. She'd learned to negotiate with creditors, to stretch every dollar until it screamed. But most of all, she'd learned to bury her dreams so deep that sometimes she almost forgot they existed. Almost. On nights when the wind blew just right, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain, she still remembered, still felt the ghost of strong arms around her, still heard that low voice promising someday. The torn piece of shawl lived in a small wooden box beneath her bed, along with her mother's pearls and other treasures too precious for daily viewing. Samuel Morrison had lost interest when the ranch's fortunes turned. He'd married a banker's daughter from Denver instead, a relief that Eleanor celebrated in private. But other suitors had been scarce. Who wanted to marry into debt and drought? Her father found the answer in Jacob Hartley, Esquire. Hartley was a lawyer from Kansas City who'd come west to manage the legal affairs of the railroad companies. He was 35, prematurely balding, with pale eyes that reminded Eleanor of a fish. But he had money, new money from questionable deals in foreclosed farms, and he had ambition. "He's willing to assume our debts," her father told her one evening as they reviewed the accounts. Another coughing fit seized him, and Eleanor waited until it passed. All of them. "Eleanor, in exchange for your hand and a controlling interest in the ranch after I'm gone." "You mean he wants to own us?" Eleanor said flatly. "He wants a respectable wife and a foothold in the territory's established families. We need his money. It's a fair trade." Fair. Eleanor wanted to laugh at the word. What was fair about selling herself to save land that was dying anyway? What was fair about her father working himself into an early grave for pride? But she looked at his gray face, at the tremor in his hands, and knew she was trapped more thoroughly than ever. It wasn't just about her anymore. Without Hartley's money, they'd lose everything. The hands would be out of work. The few remaining cattle would be sold for pennies on the dollar. Her father would die knowing he'd failed to preserve his legacy. "When?" she asked quietly. "He's coming to dinner tomorrow. If all goes well, we'll announce the engagement next month." Eleanor nodded and returned to the ledgers, though the numbers blurred before her eyes. That night, she walked out to the cottonwood grove for the first time in months. The trees were struggling too, their leaves yellowed despite the spring season. She pressed her palm against the bark where her shawl had torn, closing her eyes against the memories. "Where are you, Luke?" she whispered to the darkness. "Did you find your freedom? Did you forget?" The wind gave no answer. Dinner with Jacob Hartley was everything Eleanor expected and worse. He ate fastidiously, cutting his beef into precise squares and chewing each bite exactly 20 times. He spoke at length about his legal victories, about the opportunities presented by desperate ranchers defaulting on loans. He looked at Eleanor the way he might examine a contract, checking for flaws and advantages. "You've held up remarkably well, considering the circumstances," he told her, as if paying a compliment. "With proper attention to your appearance and deportment, you'll make an acceptable wife for a man of my standing." Eleanor bit her tongue until she tasted blood. After dinner, while the men discussed business, she escaped to the porch. The stars were brilliant in the clear sky, and she found herself searching for the North Star, remembering how Luke had once told her that it was the only star a drifter could trust. "Wool gathering, my dear." Hartley's voice made her skin crawl. He'd followed her out, standing too close, smelling of pomade and superiority. "Just taking some air. Mr. Hartley. Jacob, please, we'll be married soon enough." He moved closer, and Eleanor fought the urge to step back. "I know this isn't the romantic arrangement young women dream of, but I assure you, I'll be a dutiful husband. You'll want for nothing material. And in return," his pale eyes narrowed slightly, "in return, you'll be a proper wife, obedient, faithful, silent when appropriate." His hand touched her arm, possessive already. "I trust we understand each other." Eleanor understood perfectly. She was to be another acquisition, like the farms he foreclosed on. A trophy to display, a vessel for his heirs, a symbol of his rise in society. "We understand each other," she said, the words ashes in her mouth. Later, alone in her room, she pulled out the wooden box and held the torn fabric to her chest. Somewhere out there, Luke Carson was sleeping under these same stars. Did he know what had become of her? Did he care? The rumors that reached the ranch were fragmented, carried by traveling merchants and drifting cowboys. Luke Carson had made a name for himself up north. They said he'd helped a group of settlers fight off claim jumpers in Montana. He'd tracked down rustlers for a ranchers' association in Dakota. He was building a reputation as a man who stood for justice, who helped those who couldn't help themselves. Eleanor treasured each story, building a picture of the man he'd become. He hadn't just found his freedom, he'd found his purpose. While she was about to sign hers away to save a dying dream that wasn't even her own. A month later, as she stood in her mother's wedding dress for the final fitting, Mrs. Henderson burst into the room. "Miss Eleanor, you need to come quick. Your father." Eleanor found him collapsed at his desk, the account books scattered around him. "Doctor," Morrison came quickly, but his face was grave. "His heart," the doctor said simply. "He needs rest, no excitement, and frankly, Miss Whitfield, he needs hope. A man can't heal when he's given up." That night, as her father lay fevered and weak, Eleanor made her decision. She would marry Jacob Hartley. She would save the ranch, give her father peace in his final days. She would do her duty. But first, she would allow herself one last night of remembering. One last night to mourn the life that might have been, before she locked her heart away forever. She walked to the cottonwood grove in the moonlight, wearing only her nightgown and shawl. The trees seemed to whisper her name, and for a moment, just a moment, she could almost pretend that things were different, that she was young and free and full of hope, waiting for a gray-eyed cowboy to emerge from the shadows. "I'm sorry, Luke," she said to the wind. "I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to jump the fence." The wedding was set for the following month. The ranch hands were already preparing, trying to make the drought-stricken land look presentable for the guests from town. And Eleanor practiced being dead inside, because it was the only way she could imagine surviving what was to come. But fate, as Luke had once told her, had a way of dealing unexpected cards. And somewhere in the vast expanse of the Western Territories, a gray-eyed man was saddling his horse, following a whisper on the wind that sounded like his name. The engagement party was held on a Saturday evening in early June. The ranch house dressed in borrowed finery that couldn't quite hide the signs of decline. Chinese lanterns hung from the porch rafters, casting dancing shadows across the yard. The territorial elite had come out in force, not for Eleanor or even for the failing Double W Ranch, but for Jacob Hartley and the power he represented. Eleanor stood beside her fiancé in the parlor, wearing her mother's blue silk gown taken in at the waist and let out at the hem. She smiled when spoken to, nodded at the appropriate moments, and felt nothing. It was easier that way, to float above her body like a ghost at her own wake. "You look lovely tonight, my dear," Hartley said, his hand possessive on her elbow. "Almost worth the investment." She didn't flinch anymore at his casual cruelties. They were simply part of the bargain, like the drought and the dying cattle and her father's labored breathing from his chair by the fireplace. Judge Patterson from Cheyenne raised his glass. "To the happy couple, may their union bring prosperity to all concerned." The guests echoed the toast, and Eleanor drank the champagne that tasted like dust in her mouth. Through the window, she could see the cottonwoods swaying in the evening breeze, and for a moment, just a moment, she allowed herself to remember. The wedding was set for 2 weeks hence. Hartley had insisted on a quick ceremony, eager to finalize his acquisition of the Double W. The dress was ready, the church reserved, the papers drawn up that would give him control of everything her father had built. "I have arranged for us to honeymoon in San Francisco," Hartley told the assembled guests. "Eleanor has never seen the ocean. I thought it would be educational. Someone made a crude joke about education, and the men laughed. Eleanor excused herself, claiming she needed to check on her father, and escaped to the relative quiet of the hallway. Thomas Whitfield was dozing in his chair, the latest ledgers open on his lap. He looked so frail, so diminished from the giant of her childhood. Eleanor knelt beside him, taking his hand. "Papa?" His eyes fluttered open, still sharp despite the illness. "Eleanor, how's the party? Exactly as expected?" He squeezed her hand weakly. "I'm sorry, daughter. I wanted more for you. I know. That boy," he said suddenly, and Eleanor's heart stopped. "The cowboy. Carson. Papa, I was wrong." The words came hard, each one a struggle. "I thought I was protecting you, but I was just afraid of losing control, afraid of what people would say." He coughed, a harsh sound. "Now I'm losing you anyway. To a man who'll kill your spirit sure as drought kills grass." Eleanor felt tears burn her eyes. "It's done. Papa, the contracts are signed. Contracts can be broken. Not without destroying everything. The ranch, the men's jobs, your legacy." "My legacy?" He laughed bitterly. "What legacy? Land that won't grow grass, cattle turned to bones, a daughter sold to the highest bidder." His grip tightened with surprising strength. "You were my legacy. Eleanor, and I failed you." She couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. "I heard talk," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "That Carson boy made something of himself. Up north, they say, helping folks, doing right." He met her eyes. "If he came back, if things were different—" "Don't!" Eleanor stood abruptly, unable to bear the weight of impossible dreams. "Please, Papa, don't make this harder." But as she returned to the party, pasting on her empty smile, her father's words echoed in her mind. If he came back. The night before the wedding, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The house was full of guests. Every room occupied by distant relatives and business associates come to witness Jacob Hartley's triumph. She could hear his voice from the parlor below, regaling someone with plans for modernizing the ranch once it was his, unable to bear the confines of her room. She slipped out the back door and into the night. Her feet carried her without conscious thought to the cottonwood grove, to the place where everything had begun and ended. The moon was full, painting the landscape in silver and shadow. Eleanor sat beneath the largest tree, pulling her knees to her chest like a child. Tomorrow at this time, she would be Mrs. Jacob Hartley. The day after, she would be on a train to San Francisco, beginning a life of gilded captivity. "I tried to be strong," she whispered to the darkness. "I tried to do my duty. But God help me. I can't let him touch me. I can't spend my life dying by degrees." The wind stirred the leaves above, and for a wild moment, she considered running. She could take one of the horses, ride for the mountains, lose herself in the vastness of the frontier. But then what? A woman alone, with no money, no skills beyond those of a rancher's daughter? She'd end up dead or worse. "I should have gone with you," she said to the memory of gray eyes and gentle hands. "That night, I should have mounted up behind you and never looked back. We could have been poor together, free together." A coyote howled in the distance, and Eleanor shivered. Time to go back, time to prepare for tomorrow's sacrifice. But as she stood, brushing dirt from her nightgown, she heard something that made her heart stop. Hoofbeats, slow and steady, coming from the direction of the main road. It was probably a late guest, she told herself, or one of the hands returning from town. But something made her stay hidden behind the cottonwood's thick trunk, watching as a lone rider emerged from the darkness. The man sat his horse with easy grace, moving as one with the animal. He wore a long duster over dark clothes, his hat pulled low against the night wind. But there was something about the way he held himself, something about the way he scanned the ranch buildings with careful attention. Eleanor's hand went to her throat. It couldn't be. It was impossible. She was dreaming, or mad with grief and exhaustion. The rider dismounted near the main corral, moving with deliberate quiet. He looped his reins over the fence and stood for a long moment, looking up at the house where light still burned in several windows. Then he turned, and the moonlight caught his face. Luke Carson, older, harder, his face weathered by 3 years of sun and wind and distance, but unmistakably him. Eleanor must have made some sound, a gasp, a sob. She didn't know, because his head snapped in her direction. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other across the silver darkness. Then she was running, her bare feet flying over the rough ground, and he was moving too, catching her as she flung herself into his arms. Eleanor. Her name was a prayer on his lips. She was crying, great gasping sobs that shook her whole body. His arms tightened around her, one hand tangling in her loose hair, holding her as if she might disappear. "You came back," she managed between sobs. "You came back. I heard about the wedding." His voice was rough with emotion. "Heard about it in a saloon in Miles City. Man was reading the newspaper announcement out loud, laughing about some lawyer marrying into the Double W." He pulled back enough to look at her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "I rode 2 horses into the ground getting here. Luke, She couldn't finish. Couldn't explain the tangle of duty and despair that had brought them to this moment. "I know," he said simply. "I know about the debts, about your father's illness. I know what you're trying to do." His gray eyes were fierce in the moonlight. "But I'll be damned if I let you do it. It's too late. The contracts—" "To hell with contracts." He cupped her face in his hands, calloused thumbs gentle against her skin. "I've got money now, Eleanor, not fortune money, but enough. Enough to pay off the worst of the debts, enough to give us a start somewhere new. I can't leave my father. He's dying. Luke. Then we'll stay until—" He didn't finish, but she understood. "After that, we go Montana, maybe, or Oregon. Somewhere we can build something of our own." Eleanor closed her eyes, letting herself imagine it. A small ranch in a green valley. Simple rooms filled with laughter instead of silence. Children with gray eyes and strong hands. Freedom. "Hartley will never let me go. He's not a man who accepts losing." Luke's expression hardened. "Let him try to stop us. I'm not the same man who rode out of here 3 years ago. Eleanor, I've learned to fight for what matters." She looked at him, seeing the truth of it in the new lines around his eyes, the confident set of his shoulders. The boy who'd drifted from job to job was gone, replaced by a man who'd found his purpose. "The wedding's tomorrow," she whispered. "I know," he smiled then. A flash of the old Luke. "Figured I'd time it close. Always did like a dramatic entrance." Despite everything, the impossibility of it all, the danger, the scandal that would follow, Eleanor found herself laughing. It bubbled up from somewhere deep, washing away 3 years of carefully maintained control. "You beautiful fool," she said. "You beautiful, impossible fool." "Your fool," he corrected, and kissed her. It was different from that first kiss 3 years ago. That had been tentative, tinged with sorrow for what couldn't be. This was a claiming, a promise, a declaration of war against everyone and everything that would keep them apart. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Eleanor knew there was no going back. Whatever came tomorrow, whatever price they had to pay, she would not stand at that altar and pledge herself to Jacob Hartley. "There's a line shack about 5 miles north," Luke said. "Stock it with supplies tonight. Tomorrow, when they're all fussing with flowers and such, you slip out. I'll be waiting. And if they come after us—" His hand dropped to the gun at his hip, a gesture both casual and meaningful. "Like I said, I've learned to fight for what matters. Question is, Eleanor, are you ready to jump that fence?" She thought of her father's words, of contracts that could be broken, of legacies that weren't measured in land or cattle. She thought of 3 years of slow death and the sudden, fierce desire to live. "I've been ready since the night you left," she said. He kissed her again, quick and hard, then stepped back. "Tomorrow. Then, when the church bells ring for a wedding that won't happen, we'll be riding north. Luke, I love you." Eleanor Whitfield. Have since that first day by the fence. Should have said it then, should have fought for you. Won't make that mistake again. Then he was moving back toward his horse, every line of his body alert for danger. Eleanor watched him mount up and disappear into the darkness, taking with him her fear, her resignation, her careful numbness. Tomorrow, she would create a scandal that would echo through the territory. Tomorrow, she would break her father's heart and destroy what was left of the family name. Tomorrow, she would throw away security and position and everything she'd been raised to value. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Eleanor Whitfield was truly alive. The morning of Eleanor's wedding day dawned gray and ominous, with dark clouds massing over the mountains like an army preparing for battle. The air hung thick and heavy, that peculiar stillness that preceded the violent summer storms of the high plains. In the ranch house, chaos reigned. Mrs. Henderson directed an army of borrowed servants, while relatives fussed over flower arrangements and table settings. The bride's room was a hive of activity, with Eleanor at its center, passive as a doll, while women pinned and primped and powdered. "Such strange weather for June," Aunt Millicent fretted, adjusting Eleanor's veil for the 10th time. "I do hope it holds off until after the ceremony." Eleanor said nothing, her eyes fixed on the window where she could see riders heading into town to ensure the church was ready. Her stomach churned, but not from nerves. Hidden beneath her corset was a small leather pouch containing her mother's pearl necklace and the money she'd managed to save. Not much, but perhaps enough to help with a new start. "You're very pale, dear," her cousin Sarah observed. "Shall I fetch the rouge?" "I'm fine." The words came automatically, as they had for 3 years. Jacob Hartley had sent word that he would meet her at the church. "Bad luck to see the bride before the ceremony," he'd said, though Eleanor suspected he simply had last-minute business dealings to conclude. Even on his wedding day, money came first. "There, perfect." Aunt Millicent stepped back to admire her handiwork. "You look beautiful. Eleanor, your mother would be so proud." Eleanor doubted that very much. Her mother, from what she remembered, had been a woman of spirit who'd chosen to marry Thomas Whitfield for love, not duty. She would understand what Eleanor was about to do. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Miss Eleanor, James, the senior ranch hand, stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "Your father's asking for you." She found Thomas Whitfield in his study, dressed in his finest suit despite Dr. Morrison's orders to stay in bed. He looked up as she entered, and something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit about to break free. "You look like your mother," he said quietly. "The day we married, she was incandescent." "Papa, I need to tell you something." He gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing, aware of time ticking away. "Last night, I had a visitor." Eleanor's heart skipped. "A visitor?" "A young man I once wronged. He came to pay his respects. He said to wish us well." Her father's gaze was steady on hers. "He also came to pay off the mortgage on the north pasture, cash money, said he owed a debt to the Double W and wanted to clear it." "Papa? I don't—" "The funny thing is, Eleanor, that mortgage payment gives us breathing room. Enough that if certain arrangements were to fall through, we wouldn't lose everything after all." He leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking younger despite his illness. "Made me think about second chances, about courage." Eleanor felt tears threaten. Her father knew. Somehow, he knew. "The other funny thing," he continued conversationally, "is that I seem to have misplaced the key to the gun cabinet. Can't imagine where it's gone. Suppose if someone needed to defend themselves on a journey, they'd find the cabinet unlocked." "Papa," her voice broke. He held up a hand. "You should go, daughter. Don't want to be late to church." She crossed to him in 2 quick strides, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "I love you, and I you. Always." He caught her hand briefly. "Your mother would have liked him. I think, had she met him properly." Eleanor squeezed his fingers once, then fled before the tears could fall and ruin everything. The wedding party assembled in the yard, a parade of silk and satin that seemed absurd against the backdrop of drought-stressed land and gathering storm clouds. Eleanor climbed into the decorated wagon, her enormous dress taking up most of the space. Around her, relatives chattered nervously about the weather. The ride to town seemed endless. Each rotation of the wheels carried her closer to the church, to the moment of decision. Lightning flickered in the distance, followed by the low growl of thunder. The horses tossed their heads nervously. As they entered the main street, Eleanor saw that half the territory had turned out for the spectacle. Jacob Hartley marrying into the Double W was news, and everyone wanted to witness it. She kept her eyes straight ahead, her face composed, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. The church loomed before them, its white steeple stark against the darkening sky. Eleanor could see Jacob's carriage already there, could see him on the steps, greeting guests with proprietary satisfaction. In a few minutes, she would be expected to take his arm, to walk down that aisle, to speak words that would bind her to him forever. "Goodness, this wind!" Aunt Millicent clutched at her hat as a gust swept through the street. "Everyone inside, quickly!" Eleanor allowed herself to be helped from the wagon, her skirts billowing around her. The crowd pressed close, eager for a glimpse of the bride. She moved through them like a sleepwalker, her mind already miles away. At the church door, Hartley waited, his pale eyes possessive as they swept over her. "My dear, you look absolutely—" A crack of thunder drowned out his words. The sky opened, and suddenly rain was falling in sheets, sending the crowd scrambling for cover. Eleanor stood frozen as water soaked through her veil, her elaborate dress growing heavy. "Inside!" Hartley grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. "This damn weather! Mr. Hartley!" They turned to see young Timothy, one of the Double W ranch hands, spurring his horse through the chaos. He was soaked through, his face tight with urgency. "What is it, boy?" Hartley snapped. "It's Mr. Whitfield, sir. He's taken a bad turn. Doc Morrison says—" He glanced at Eleanor, his eyes full of sympathy. "He says, come quick." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Not now, not when she was so close to freedom. "We'll proceed with the ceremony," Hartley decided. "Send word that—" "No." Eleanor wrenched her arm from his grip. "I'm going to my father. Don't be ridiculous. The guests are waiting." She turned on him then, 3 years of suppressed rage finally finding voice. "My father is dying, and you want me to stand at an altar and pretend to be happy? What kind of monster are you?" His face flushed ugly red. "The kind who holds your family's debts. Remember that, my dear. The North Pasture mortgage has been paid." She lifted her chin, rainwater streaming down her face. "We're not as desperate as you thought." Before he could respond, she was moving, gathering her sodden skirts and pushing through the crowd. Someone had brought a horse, her own mare, saddled and ready. Timothy helped her mount, her wedding dress bunching awkwardly around her. "Miss Eleanor," he said quietly, pressing something into her hand. "From the house. Thought you might need it." It was her mother's riding coat, worn but warm. Eleanor looked at him, seeing knowledge in his young eyes. How many of the hands knew? How many were complicit in this escape? "Tell my father," she swallowed hard. "Tell him I understand about second chances." Then she was riding, spurring the mare through the storm-lashed streets. Behind her, she could hear Hartley shouting, calling for men to stop her. But the rain was her ally now, turning the world into a gray curtain that swallowed sight and sound. She didn't ride toward the ranch, 5 miles north, through rain that fell like judgment. She pushed the mare harder than she ever had before. The wedding dress was a sodden weight, dragging at her, but she couldn't stop to cut it away. Time was everything now. The line shack appeared through the rain like a miracle, its small windows glowing with lamplight. Eleanor had barely reined in before the door flew open and Luke was there, catching her as she half fell from the saddle. "Eleanor, God, I thought—" He pulled her inside, out of the storm. When I saw the weather, I worried you wouldn't be able—" "My father," she gasped. "They said he's dying. I can't leave. Luke, I can't—" "Shh." He held her close, heedless of her soaked dress. "It's all right. We'll go back. We'll be there with him." She pulled back to look at him. "But Hartley, the scandal. Let them come." His gray eyes were steady, certain. "Your father gave us his blessing. Eleanor, last night, when I went to him, he said—" Luke's voice roughened. "He said he'd rather see you happy and scandalous than respectable and dead inside." Eleanor began to cry then, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Luke held her through it, murmuring wordless comfort while the storm raged outside. When she finally quieted, he helped her out of the ruined wedding dress, wrapping her in blankets and his own dry coat. The dress lay on the floor like a discarded chrysalis, and Eleanor felt something hard and bright emerge from her chest. Hope, maybe, or just the simple joy of being able to breathe. "What now?" she asked. "Now we go back. Face whatever comes." He cupped her face in his hands. "Together." She nodded, then remembered Timothy's words. The ranch hand, Timothy, he said to tell my father I understand about second chances. Luke smiled. "Your father's a wise man." "Took him a while, but he got there." Thunder crashed overhead, rattling the windows of the little shack. But Eleanor felt no fear. She'd already weathered the worst storm, the one inside herself. Whatever came next, she would meet it as herself, not as the pale ghost she'd been for 3 years. "I love you," she said simply. "I should have said it that night by the cottonwoods. Should have been brave enough to choose love over duty. You're saying it now." He kissed her gently. "That's all that matters." When the worst of the storm had passed, they mounted up, Eleanor on her mare, Luke on his dusty trail horse, and rode back toward the Double W, toward scandal and judgment, toward her father's deathbed and an uncertain future. But for the first time in 3 years, Eleanor rode with her head high and her heart light. She'd finally jumped the fence, and whatever waited on the other side, she would meet it as a free woman. The rain had washed the world clean, and in the distance, a break in the clouds showed a strip of pure blue sky. The church doors stood open to the storm-cooled air, revealing a scene of barely controlled chaos within. Water pooled on the floorboards where guests had taken shelter, their fine clothes sodden and spirits dampened. But it was the tableau at the altar that drew every eye. Jacob Hartley stood rigid with fury, his pale face mottled red. Beside him, Reverend Mills clutched his Bible like a shield, clearly wishing himself anywhere else. The pews buzzed with shocked whispers as word spread through the crowd. The bride had fled. "Find her!" Hartley's voice cracked like a whip. "She can't have gone far in this weather." Judge Patterson stepped forward, his judicial bearing intact despite his water-spotted coat. "Now, Jacob, surely the young lady has good reason. Her father is gravely ill. Her father was fine this morning when I sent my man to check." Hartley's eyes glittered dangerously. "This is a calculated insult, nothing more." Through the church windows, lightning illuminated the sky in stark, white flashes. Thunder followed, rolling across the plains like divine commentary on the proceedings below. It was then that the doors swung wide once more. Luke Carson entered first, his duster dripping rainwater, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. Behind him came Eleanor, wrapped in an old riding coat, her elaborate wedding hairstyle destroyed by wind and rain. Her chin lifted in defiance. The whispers erupted into exclamations. Women gasped behind their hands. Men shifted uneasily. Everyone knew the story. The rancher's daughter and the drifting cowboy. The forbidden attraction, the banishment. And now here they stood, together, in the very church where she should have been marrying another. "You," Hartley's voice was low, venomous. "You dare show your face here?" "I came back to take her from the altar," Luke said calmly, his words carrying clearly through the shocked silence. "Seems the weather beat me to it." "Eleanor," Aunt Millicent pushed forward, her face a mask of scandalized horror. "What is the meaning of this? Your reputation is my own concern." Eleanor interrupted. She moved to stand beside Luke, their shoulders touching. "I won't marry Mr. Hartley. Not today, not ever." Hartley laughed, an ugly sound. "You think you have a choice? Your father owes me. The North Pasture debt is paid." Eleanor said, "As for the rest, we'll manage without selling my soul." "Selling your—" Hartley's face purpled. "You ungrateful little—" Luke stepped forward, placing himself between Eleanor and her would-be groom. "Choose your next words carefully. Hartley." The threat hung in the air like the electricity before a lightning strike. Several men in the crowd shifted, hands moving toward weapons. The tension ratcheted higher. "Please," Reverend Mills raised his hands. "This is a house of God." "Then let's speak truth in it," Eleanor said, stepping around Luke despite his protective stance. "Mr. Hartley, you never wanted a wife. You wanted a possession, a brood mare with a pedigree, someone to polish your reputation and give you an entrance into society." "How dare you? I dare because I have nothing left to lose." She pulled the engagement ring from her finger, holding it out. "Take this back. Find yourself another woman to buy. I'm not for sale." Hartley snatched the ring, his face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this. When your father dies, when the ranch fails, when you're destitute and desperate." "Then I'll be free and destitute," Eleanor shot back, "which is still better than being your prisoner." A murmur ran through the crowd, shock mixed with something else. Admiration, perhaps, or recognition. How many women stood in that church wearing rings that felt like shackles? How many had married for duty rather than love? "Mr. Carson," Judge Patterson's voice cut through the noise. "I believe there are still warrants for your arrest in some counties. Horse theft, wasn't it?" Luke met his gaze steadily. "Those charges were dropped. Judge, the man who filed them was caught with a running iron and a pen full of other folks' cattle. But I appreciate your concern for the law." "And what are your intentions toward Miss Whitfield?" "I intend to marry her," Luke said simply, "if she'll have me. Not for her land or her name or what she can bring me. Just for herself." Eleanor turned to him, tears mixing with the rainwater still on her cheeks. In front of the entire town, in defiance of every social convention. She took his hand. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll have you." The church erupted. Women fanned themselves. Men argued loudly about propriety and scandal. Hartley stormed toward the door, shoving past anyone in his way, shouting about lawsuits and revenge. Through it all, Luke and Eleanor stood quiet in the eye of the storm, hands clasped, eyes only for each other. "Miss Eleanor." The voice was Timothy's, urgent and breathless. He'd pushed through the crowd, his young face grave. "Your father, Miss Doc Morrison, says you should come now." The ride back to the Double W was a blur of pounding hooves and flying mud. Eleanor clung to Luke's back as they rode double on his horse, her mare too exhausted for another hard run. Behind them, half the town followed in carriages and on horseback, drawn by drama and genuine concern in equal measure. They found Thomas Whitfield propped in his bed, his breathing shallow but his eyes alert. "Doctor." Morrison stepped aside as Eleanor rushed in, dropping to her knees beside the bed. "Papa?" "Eleanor." His voice was whisper-thin. "My brave girl, you came back." "Of course I came back." His gaze moved to Luke, standing in the doorway. "You too, son. Good. Things to say. Not much time." Luke moved into the room, hat in hand. "Mr. Whitfield. Thomas. Call me Thomas." He gestured weakly for Luke to come closer. "I was wrong about you. Wrong about many things. Can you forgive an old fool?" "Nothing to forgive, sir." "There is." Thomas turned back to Eleanor, his hand finding hers. "I've made arrangements with Judge Patterson, the ranch. It's yours. Eleanor, all of it. Hartley can't touch it. Papa, don't talk about... Listen." His grip tightened briefly. I've watched you these 3 years. Watched you dying inside, getting harder, smaller, like watching your mother's spirit drain away all over again. He paused, gathering strength. But today you were alive, magnificent, like her. Tears ran freely down Eleanor's face. I'm sorry about the scandal. Sorry I couldn't be the daughter you wanted. You're exactly the daughter I wanted. Just took me too long to see it. His eyes moved between Eleanor and Luke. Reverend Mills is here somewhere. If you're willing, I'd like to see my daughter married. Properly this time. To the right man. Eleanor looked at Luke, seeing her own wonder reflected in his gray eyes. Here? Now? Why not? Thomas managed a ghost of his old smile. Already got the flowers and the guests. Seems a shame to waste them. Within minutes, the room had transformed. The crowd from the church pressed in. Curiosity overcoming propriety. Reverend Mills was located and convinced. Someone produced a ring, Luke's mother's, he admitted. Carried with him through years of wandering, waiting for the right moment. As thunder rolled across the plains and rain lashed the windows, Eleanor Whitfield and Luke Carson stood hand in hand beside her father's bed. She wore a water-stained riding coat over her undergarments. He was trail-dusty and weather-beaten. They had no flowers, no music, no finery. It was perfect. Dearly beloved, Reverend Mills began, his voice carrying over the storm. We are gathered here in unusual circumstances. A ripple of nervous laughter ran through the room. Do you, Luke Carson, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, in drought and in plenty, through storm and sunshine, as long as you both shall live? I do. Luke's voice was strong. Certain. I surely do. And do you, Eleanor Whitfield, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love and to cherish, forsaking all others, through whatever trials may come? Eleanor squeezed her father's hand, then looked into Luke's eyes. I do, with all my heart. Then, by the power vested in me by God and the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife. The Reverend smiled. You may kiss your bride, son. As Luke drew Eleanor into his arms, as their lips met in a kiss that was both ending and beginning, Thomas Whitfield sighed contentedly. That's how it should be, he murmured. That's how love should be, wild and free as the land itself. Outside, the storm was breaking. Shafts of sunlight pierced the clouds, painting the rain-washed world in gold. In the distance, a rainbow arched across the sky, its colors vivid against the retreating darkness. Eleanor felt her father's hand go slack in hers, felt the gentle release of his final breath. But there was no sudden grief, no wrenching loss. He had held on long enough to make things right, to see her safe and loved and free. It was, she thought, the last and greatest gift he could have given. He's gone, Doctor, Morrison said quietly. Eleanor nodded, pressing a kiss to her father's forehead. When she stood, Luke's arms were waiting, strong and sure around her. No regrets? He asked softly. She thought of all that had led to this moment, the years of loneliness, the forbidden embrace, the long separation, the desperate flight from a loveless match. Every choice, every sorrow, every moment of courage and cowardice alike. No regrets, she said. Not one. The crowd began to disperse. Voices hushed with respect for the dead and wonder at what they'd witnessed. Soon, only the family remained, and the hands who'd served the Double W faithfully through good times and bad. What now? Eleanor asked, looking around the room that held so many memories. Now, Luke said, we build something new, together. Eleanor nodded, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. The Double W would survive, would thrive again under their care. But more than that, they would make it a place of love and laughter, of second chances and fresh starts. As the last of the storm clouds parted and the prairie gleamed under the afternoon sun, Eleanor Whitfield Carson stepped onto the porch of her childhood home. The air smelled of rain and sage, of endings and beginnings, Somewhere in the distance, wild horses ran free across the grasslands, and Eleanor smiled. She had finally jumped the fence. The storm had transformed the landscape, turning dry creek beds into rushing torrents and painting the prairie in shades of silver and green. Luke and Eleanor rode hard through the aftermath, her wedding dress long abandoned, replaced by practical riding clothes borrowed from the ranch house. Behind them, the chaos of the failed wedding and impromptu marriage faded with each mile. Jacob Hartley would not give up easily. They both knew this. Even now, he was likely rallying his men, calling in favors, planning retribution. A man like Hartley didn't accept public humiliation without seeking revenge. "There's a place I know," Luke said over the sound of hoofbeats and rushing water. "Old Trapper's Cave, about 10 miles north. We can rest the horses. Wait out anyone who might be following." Eleanor nodded, trusting his judgment. The landscape had changed in 3 years. Luke knew the hidden paths and secret places that had sheltered him during his wandering days. They found the cave as dusk was falling, a shallow scoop in the rock face hidden behind a screen of juniper. Luke tended the horses while Eleanor gathered wood for a fire, their movements efficient, wordless. They had fallen into partnership as naturally as breathing. Inside the cave, with firelight dancing on stone walls, they finally allowed themselves to rest. Eleanor sank onto Luke's spread blanket, suddenly aware of her exhaustion. The day felt like a lifetime. The morning preparations, the flight from the church, her father's death, their marriage. Joy and grief tangled together until she couldn't separate them. "I should feel guilty," she said quietly, staring into the flames. "My father is lying dead, and here I am, running off into the wilderness like some dime novel heroine." Luke settled beside her, close but not touching. "Your father got what he wanted most, to see you free. Mourning him doesn't mean stopping your life. Hartley will come after us. Let him try." There was steel in Luke's voice. "I've faced down claim jumpers and rustlers, corrupt lawmen and hired guns. Hartley's just another bully who thinks money makes him untouchable." Eleanor turned to study his profile in the firelight. The boy she'd known was truly gone, replaced by this capable, dangerous man. Yet the gentleness remained, the quality that had first drawn her to him. "Tell me," she said. "Tell me about these 3 years. I heard stories, fragments, but I want to know the truth." Luke was quiet for a long moment, then began to speak. He told her about the first months after leaving the Double W, drifting from ranch to ranch, trying to outrun the memory of gray-green eyes and a forbidden kiss. How he'd hired on with a cattle drive heading to Montana, learning the trails, saving every penny. Then came the trouble in Billings. He continued. Group of settlers, immigrants mostly, getting pushed off their claims by a big ranching combine, legal-like, but dirty, forged papers, intimidation, hired thugs. "And you helped them?" A wry smile touched his lips. "Couldn't seem to help myself. Kept thinking about what you said that night, about being trapped, about men making decisions for folks who had no say. These people had no one to speak for them." He told her about the confrontation, the gunfight that followed, the way the settlers had stood behind him when the law came calling. How word had spread that Luke Carson would stand for the underdog, and how that reputation had led to other conflicts, other chances to balance the scales. "Made some money too," he admitted. "Bounties on rustlers, rewards from grateful folks. Nothing like Hartley's fortune, but enough to start over, enough to offer you something more than just empty hands." "I never needed anything but you," Eleanor said softly. "I know, but I needed to be able to offer it anyway." He met her eyes. A man's got his pride. They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them and the storm's aftermath. Then Eleanor spoke of her own years, the slow grinding down of hope, the weight of duty, the way she'd learned to move through life like a ghost to avoid feeling anything at all. "The worst part was that I started to believe it was what I deserved," she confessed. "That one night of happiness was all I'd ever get, and I should be grateful for the memory." "Eleanor, no, let me finish." She drew a shaky breath. "When I saw you in that church, When you said those words, I came back to take her from the altar. It was like waking from a nightmare, like remembering I was allowed to want things, to choose my own path. Luke reached out then, drawing her against him. She went willingly, fitting into the circle of his arms as if she'd never left. I should have taken you with me that night, he said into her hair. Should have been brave enough to risk your father's bullets. We weren't ready then, either of us. Eleanor pulled back to look at him. You needed to find yourself, become the man you are now. And I needed to learn the difference between duty and love, between existing and living. And now we're here, married, free. She smiled, though tears threatened. My father's dead. Hartley wants our heads, and we're hiding in a cave like outlaws. It's perfect. Luke laughed, the sound echoing off stone walls. When you put it that way. Their laughter faded into something else, an awareness that had simmered between them since that first forbidden embrace. They were alone, truly alone, bound by law and choice and desire. Eleanor, Luke said, her name a question and a plea. She answered by kissing him, pouring 3 years of longing into the contact. His arms tightened around her, one hand tangling in her hair, and she felt the careful control he'd maintained start to fracture. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Eleanor made a decision. She stood, fingers moving to the buttons of her borrowed shirt. Eleanor, we don't have to. Yes, she said firmly. We do. I've spent 3 years feeling like my body belonged to everyone but me, to my father's plans, to Hartley's negotiations, to society's expectations. Tonight I choose, and I choose you. What followed was tender and fierce by turns, a claiming and a surrender, a promise made flesh. The firelight painted their skin gold and shadow, and the storm-washed world outside their shelter ceased to exist. Afterward, they lay entwined on the blanket, Eleanor's head on Luke's chest, listening to his heartbeat. She felt transformed, reborn, as if the girl who'd stood in that church this morning was a stranger she'd once known. No regrets, Luke asked, echoing his earlier question. Never. She pressed a kiss to the scar on his shoulder, new since their parting. Another story to learn. Though I do wonder what happens tomorrow. Tomorrow we head north. I've got friends in Montana, good people who'll help us get established. We'll find land, build something of our own. And Hartley? Luke's arms tightened around her. Hartley's reach isn't as long as he thinks. And I've got friends too. Now, men who remember when I stood with them against bigger bullies than a Kansas City lawyer. Eleanor traced patterns on his chest, thinking, I hate to leave the double W. It's been in my family for... Who says we're leaving it? Luke interrupted. We'll get established. Make sure Hartley can't touch us legally. Then come back. The ranch is yours. Eleanor, your father made sure of that. We'll hire good men to run it while we're gone. Then return when the dust settles. You do that? Come back here, where everyone knows our story. I'd live in hell itself if that's where you wanted to make a home. He tilted her chin up to look at him. But I don't think we'll need to. Scandal fades. What matters is the life we build after it's forgotten. They talked through the night, making plans and sharing dreams. Eleanor learned about the valley Luke had scouted in Montana, perfect for horses and cattle. Luke listened as she described her vision for the Double W, not just a ranch, but a community, a place where families like those immigrants he'd helped could find work and dignity. As dawn approached, painting the cave entrance in soft pink light, they prepared to move on. Eleanor dressed in her practical clothes, braiding her hair tight, checking the loads in the pistol Luke had given her. You look like an outlaw's woman, Luke teased, though his eyes were warm with appreciation. Good thing I married an outlaw then. She swung up onto her horse with easy grace. Though I prefer to think of us as revolutionaries. Revolutionary? Luke tested the word, grinning. I like it. What are we revolting against? Everything, Eleanor said simply. Every rule that says a woman can't choose her own path, every law that lets rich men crush poor ones, every tradition that values property over love. That's a lot of revolting. Then we'd better get started. They rode out into the new day, leaving the cave and its memories behind. The storm had washed the world clean, and everything sparkled with possibility. Behind them lay scandal and death, ahead uncertainty and danger. But Eleanor felt no fear. She rode beside the man she loved, free under the endless sky, writing her own story with every hoofbeat. They were outlaws now, perhaps, revolutionaries, certainly, but more than that, they were themselves. Not the rancher's daughter and the hired hand, not the scandal and the drifter, but Luke and Eleanor, bound by choice and love and the wild courage to claim their own destiny. As they crested a rise, Eleanor looked back one last time. The double W was invisible in the distance, but she could feel it pulling at her. Threads of memory and duty not easily broken. "We'll come back," Luke said, reading her thoughts. "When we're ready. When we're strong enough that no one can tear us apart again." Eleanor nodded and turned her face north, toward Montana and the future. Somewhere behind them, Jacob Hartley was probably mounting his pursuit. Let him come. She'd learned to shoot during Luke's absence, and she'd learned harder lessons too, that freedom was worth any price, that love was worth any scandal, that choosing your own path was the only way to truly live. The sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the storm clouds, and two riders moved across the vast landscape, small figures against the endless prairie, carrying their own light into whatever darkness awaited. Dawn broke golden over the mountain peaks, painting the world in shades of amber and rose. The storm had left the air crystal clear, so pure that Eleanor could see for miles across the vast expanse of untamed wilderness. They had ridden through the night, putting distance between themselves and whatever pursuit Hartley might have mounted. Now, as their horses picked their way down a rocky slope, Eleanor saw it, the valley Luke had described. It spread before them like a promise made manifest, green and lush from the recent rains, bordered by protective mountains and crossed by a silver thread of river. "There," Luke said simply, but she heard the pride in his voice. "Home, if you'll have it." Eleanor's throat tightened with emotion. After years of living in a cage, however gilded, the sight of so much open space, so much possibility, nearly overwhelmed her. "It's perfect." They made camp by the river as the sun climbed higher, watering the horses and finally allowing exhaustion to claim them. Eleanor dozed against Luke's shoulder, feeling safer than she had in years despite, or perhaps because of, their outlaw status. She woke to the sound of approaching horses. Luke was already on his feet, hand on his gun, positioning himself between her and the riders. Eleanor scrambled up, reaching for her own weapon, heart pounding. 3 men emerged from the tree line, and Luke's tension eased. "Tom! Marcus!" He raised a hand in greeting. "Didn't expect to see you boys this far south." The lead rider, a grizzled man with kind eyes, grinned. "Heard tell there was some excitement down Wyoming way. Figured you might need some backup, especially with a new bride to protect." Eleanor stepped forward, chin high despite her trail-worn appearance. These were Luke's friends, the men he'd fought beside, and their opinion mattered more than she'd expected. "Ma'am," Tom touched his hat brim respectfully. "Tom Brennan. This here's Marcus Swift and Jake Rodriguez. We've been holding down Luke's claim, making sure no one jumps it while he was gone." "Eleanor," she said, then corrected herself with a small smile. "Eleanor Carson. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Carson. Luke sent word he was going to fetch his girl, but we weren't sure." Tom's weathered face creased in a wider smile. "Well, any woman who'd make an honest man of this saddle tramp must be something special." "She is," Luke said quietly, his hand finding hers. Marcus, younger and more serious, spoke up. "There's been some telegrams flying. Luke, that lawyer fellow. Hartley? He's put out word wanting you both brought back. Says there's charges, horse theft, breach of promise, all manner of legal nonsense." Let him talk, Luke said. We're in Montana territory now. Different jurisdiction. And I've got friends among the territorial marshals. Still, Jake added, his Mexican accent soft but his words sharp. Might be wise to lay low for a spell. Let things cool down. They spent the day setting up a more permanent camp, the men working together with easy efficiency while Eleanor learned the rhythms of this new life. She helped where she could, refusing to be treated like fragile china, earning approving nods from Luke's friends. As evening fell, they sat around the fire sharing a simple meal. Tom told stories of Luke's exploits, the time he'd faced down 5 rustlers single-handed, the winter he'd tracked a kidnapped child through a blizzard. Eleanor listened with wonder, piecing together the man her husband had become. "What about you, Mrs. Carson?" Marcus asked. "Takes a special kind of courage to walk away from everything you've known." Eleanor considered the question, staring into the fire. "I didn't walk away from everything. I walked toward something, toward myself, I suppose, toward the life I was meant to live instead of the one chosen for me. Here's to choosing," Tom said, raising his coffee cup in a toast. "And to them that's brave enough to do it." Later, as the men bedded down around the fire, Luke and Eleanor walked to the river's edge. The water gurgled softly over stones, and somewhere in the darkness an owl called. "Your friends are good men." Eleanor said, "They are. Would ride through hell for any one of us." Luke wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her head. "They'll help us build here a real home, not just a camp. And the Double W? James and the boys will hold it together. I sent word with a rider we passed yesterday. Told them to work with Judge Patterson. Keep things running until we can return." He paused. "If you want to return." Eleanor turned in his arms to face him. "Of course I want to return. It's my heritage, my father's legacy, but—" She gestured to the valley around them. "This could be our legacy, something we build together from nothing but hope and hard work. Both, then. In time." "In time," she agreed. They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of their new home. Then Eleanor asked the question that had been haunting her. "Do you think he loved her? My father and my mother. I know he did." Luke's voice was certain. "Saw it in his eyes when he talked about you looking like her. Man doesn't carry that kind of pain for someone he didn't love deep. He lost himself after she died, became someone else, harder, more controlling. Grief does that, makes you hold too tight to what's left." Luke tilted her face up to his. "But he found himself again at the end, gave us his blessing, gave you your freedom. That's love too." Eleanor nodded, tears pricking her eyes. Tomorrow she would grieve properly, would find a way to honor her father's memory. But tonight, she was exactly where she needed to be. "Mrs. Carson," Tom's voice called from the camp. "Got some visitors coming, friendly ones," he added quickly as Luke's hand went to his gun. They returned to find a small wagon approaching, driven by a middle-aged woman with steel-gray hair and a determined expression. Beside her sat a younger woman, clearly her daughter, holding a baby. "Luke Carson," the older woman said, climbing down with surprising agility. "I'm Helen Morrison, no relation to that doctor in Wyoming. This is my daughter Sarah and grandson little Pete. Heard you were back, and with a bride no less. Mrs. Morrison." Luke helped her down. "This is Eleanor, my wife." Helen studied Eleanor with sharp eyes, taking in her riding clothes, the pistol at her hip, the way she stood tall despite everything. Then she smiled. "About time this boy found a woman with backbone. Welcome to the valley, dear. We live about 2 miles north," Sarah explained, shifting the baby. "Papa would have come, but he's laid up with a twisted ankle. He said to tell you the Hendersons are willing to sell that parcel you had your eye on, if you're still interested." "I am." Luke glanced at Eleanor. "Borders our claim here. Good water, sheltered valleys, room to grow." Helen reached into the wagon and pulled out a covered basket. "Brought some supplies, bread, preserves, dried meat. Figured you'd be traveling light." Her eyes twinkled. Also brought some proper clothes for Mrs. Carson, if she's interested. My daughter's about her size. Eleanor felt tears threaten again at the simple kindness. Thank you. Thank you. No tears now, Helen said briskly. We look after our own in this valley. Luke helped us when no one else would. Ran off those men who were trying to steal our water rights. We don't forget. They stayed for an hour, sharing news and plans. Eleanor learned about the small communities scattered through the valley ranchers and farmers. Some former soldiers, a few immigrant families, all trying to build something lasting in this wild land. After the Morrisons left, promising to return with more neighbors for a proper welcome, Eleanor sat by the fire feeling overwhelmed by the day's revelations. They accept me, she said wonderingly. They don't care about the scandal, about what I left behind. Out here, your past matters less than your present. Jake said from across the fire. What counts is how you treat your neighbors, how you handle yourself when trouble comes. And trouble will come, Marcus added quietly. Hartley won't give up easy. Men like him never do. Then we'll face it, Eleanor said firmly. Together, Luke squeezed her hand. Together. As the fire burned low and the men began settling for sleep, Eleanor found herself looking up at the vast canopy of stars. Somewhere out there, beyond these mountains, the life she'd fled continued without her. Tongues would wag, reputations would be shredded, business would go on. But here, in this hidden valley with its clear river and guardian peaks, something new was beginning. A life chosen rather than inherited. A love tested by separation and strengthened by reunion. A future written by their own hands. No regrets? Luke asked one more time, reading her contemplative mood. Eleanor looked around the camp, at the loyal men who'd accepted her without question, at the valley that would become their home, at the man beside her who'd ridden through storm and scandal to claim her. No regrets, she said, only gratitude. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There was a home to build, land to work, a community to join. Eventually, they would have to deal with Hartley and his threats, would have to return to Wyoming to properly claim her inheritance. But tonight, Eleanor Carson sat beneath the Montana stars, free as the wild horses that ran these valleys, bound only by love and choice and the endless possibilities of the frontier. She had jumped the fence at last and found on the other side not emptiness but abundance of love, of friendship, of purpose. In the distance, a wolf howled, and its pack answered, their voices rising in wild harmony. Eleanor smiled, recognizing kindred spirits. She too had found her pack, her place, her voice. The girl who had stood on a porch watching the horizon, dreaming of freedom, was gone. In her place sat a woman who had claimed that freedom with both hands, whatever the cost. And as Luke's arm came around her, as the fire crackled and the river sang its ancient song, Eleanor knew that the price had been worth paying. This was what her mother would have wanted for her. This was what her father, in his final moments, had understood. This was home. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Eleanor and Luke's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while telling it. Where are you listening from today? Please comment below and let's connect. I'd love to know if you're enjoying these tales from your ranch, your commute, or perhaps while dreaming of your own frontier adventures. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Eleanor's choice. Did she make the right decision? What would you have done in her place? Your comments and stories make this community special. Until our next adventure, keep riding free.